And now our host, Stephen Lee Morris.
Welcome to Animal Farm, City Garage's weekly discussion of theater, politics, and pets. This week, we'll be joined by Rob Wienert-Kendt, editor of American Theater Magazine, for a national perspective on what in heaven's name is going to happen to the theater post-pandemic. Huge thanks to Lindsay for sharing her video of Molly the Pooch and her showdown with a piece of broccoli, which we'll be seeing at the end of the segment. If you have videos of your pet, which you'd be willing to share with an international audience, please send it to animalfarm@citygarage.org. That's animalfarm, one word, @citygarage, also one word.org. If you have topics that you'd like to see discussed on the show, also please send those along to the same email address, animalfarm@citygarage.org. Those of us who have been haunting Southern California for decades will remember the writings of Rob Wienert-Kendt. He wrote for the Los Angeles Downtown News. Rob was also the founding editor-in-chief of Backstage West before he went to New York to take on the job of editor at American Theater Magazine. Rob also writes about theater for the New York Times, Time Out New York, and the Los Angeles Times. He studied film at USC and is a composer member of BMI Lehrman Engel Musical Theater Workshop. Rob Wienert-Kendt, welcome to Animal Farm.
Stephen Morris, it's so good to see you and talk to you again.
From a national perspective, this is the first question. I mean, people here are like, will theater ever come back? What's it going to look like? How, as a business, as an activity, what are you seeing around the country in terms of how people are coping with that? Is there any confidence that the theater can return in its current form or in the form it has operated at? It seems like the business model was already expiring before COVID, and this has been like another dagger into it.
Well, it's not, my insights are not that original, but I could give a national perspective, and also from starting with New York, because that's where I'm based, and that's where, for better and worse, the commercial heart of U.S. theater is. And I think a lot of theater around the country still takes a cue from the sort of health of the commercial realm. Since I live here, and my last show I saw was in mid-March, and I was ready to go see more. And then I've been pretty much working from this desk since March 11th, March 12th, something like that. It was already, like, literally was in the air. We know the virus was in the air, but also this feeling that this model is directly threatened by a virus, which allows us not to gather, right? But it specifically gets acute in New York. I know I don't know if you remember the first time you ever sat in a Broadway house.
Yeah.
I had been spoiled by sitting in theaters not on Broadway. The business model is based on cramming literally as many bodies as they can into small, cramped seats, literally taking them off buses from all over the world, all over New Jersey, everywhere, the tri-state area. All those things are bad. Like, just go to checklist of bad. Confined space, tight, people crammed in 8 shows a week, like that whole business model. And even that business model in the commercial sphere, shows barely break, most shows lose money.
Yeah.
And the ones that do make money are these giant ones that park there forever. So starting at the top, if you want to call it the top, but starting with the commercial model, that seems existentially threatened for a time I can't even imagine. It's hard for me to imagine. I think there's a lot of money at stake in trying to bring it back, but the obstacles are so huge. I guess where I'm seeing I hate to use this cliche of green shoots, but where I've seen some innovation, and what I've been thinking since the start of it, and if I'm seeing it start to happen, is that perhaps the center of gravity will shift. That it already had shifted. There already is a huge, there's theater everywhere, especially since the 60s, and you could trace it back to the New Federal Theater if you want to, but since the 60s, regional theater, it's been everywhere. But I think especially now, that business model, the nonprofit business model, has huge problems of its own, but it does have more room like literally more room, but also more room to innovate and more room to play with the ratio of earned to donated income. Like some theaters are doing okay because they've got donors and they've got subscribers and they've got people who are ready to wait and ready to come up with new ways to do it. So I think also not just the economics, but I think I think we might see some of this in the New York for-profit sphere, but also maybe New York nonprofits, but around the country, what I'm looking to, places that can do more stuff outdoors, mixes of virtual and in person. So I just read about the Wilma Theater in Philadelphia is going to do Will Arbery's play Heroes of the Fourth Turning. They've got an Airbnb in the Poconos, and they've got actors quarantining, bubbling together, and they're going to. I can't remember if they're going to film it and then stream that to their subscribers, or whether they're going to live stream it from the house, like you watch the play from the house. Either way, it's a way to sort of combine live. And then there's a lot of places around the country that are putting things on stages without an audience, the way the sports are doing, right?
Yes.
So I do think theater, the for-profit capitalist theater, I think it's sort of topsy-turvy. They're the most threatened, I think, and the nonprofit theater, which is always threatened. It's by nature not it's a money losing proposition. It's sort of set up to do that. It's sort of set up to. Now, there's going to be huge attrition and huge losses. I think we're going to see that, and I think the art form of theater.
Huge losses in regional theaters, are you saying? Or
I mean, I just think there already have been huge losses in terms of jobs and staff.
CTG laid off 50%, furloughed 50% of its staff.
And I think if this extends for another year, which it looks like it might, I mean, a lot of folks aren't even talking about a real in-person season until next fall.
Right.
I think I really even hate to say it out loud as the editor of American Theater, but I feel like we will have some theaters closing, just like going away. And I've even heard some big ones say, no theater is too big to fail. Like no theater, some of the and depending how they entered the crisis, what kind of what their balance sheet looked like, they might be hitting some shoals. I don't, again.
You're thinking, from the way you're talking, it sounds, are you suggesting that the commercial theaters are actually more vulnerable than the regional theaters still, or is that an overgeneralization?
I mean, I just feel that business model, I'm not a producer and I haven't looked at a balance sheet in great detail. I just know that the whole, it's almost like there was like the dot-com bubble, or like the whole Times Square New York Broadway thing that has been booming ever since the 90s, basically the Lion King and like that Tourist and the Phantom. I feel like that has been just cut off, like it's been decapitated. I just don't know how and I feel like I know there's a lot of creative people in that sphere who are trying to find ways to do that. I just feel like or I guess I don't want to use terrible analogy, but it's almost like this bomb went off and it's just sending people out. Like, what do we like the ripples from this explosion? There's no work there, and you can't imagine at the epicenter how there will be. And so people are looking elsewhere. I mean, I even as someone who covers theater, I'm looking, well, Arizona Theater Company is talking about starting their season in January, socially distanced indoors. Maybe I'm from Arizona originally. I have friends and places to stay there. Yep. Maybe I'll be there. Maybe I'll be going around the country to see the theater. I don't need to physically do that. Our magazine is based in New York, but we have reporters all over, and one of our full-time staff is in Chicago. So, we already do have a national purview, but I don't have a lot of reason to be here. I did see a show outdoors in New Jersey recently. There was an outdoor play at Premier Stages at a university, a one-person show. It was equity, one person. And even with that, they had a lot of safety protocols, had to be tested constantly. They all had masks on. It feels a little awkward. It feels a little weird. I don't know if you've been to any outdoor or virtual I mean, not virtual, but outdoor or masked performances. But it's a it's a strange feeling.
Yes.
But anyway, I would say, the cliche that people often say is like theater will survive, and I agree. Theater, storytelling in a gathered space, a live space, will survive. Whether the theaters, the actual buildings, the institutions, and the careers of the people we love, I don't know what kind of shape they're going to be in when this comes back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which brings us to the second issue I wanted to raise, and that is the unions who represent those people we love. And there's in Los Angeles, there's two of them primarily, and New York is not that different, and that's Actors Equity Association and SAG-AFTRA, which are now in dispute. It's kind of what appears to be a turf war. And I was just wondering if you, for background, the accusation was made by SAG that AFTRA was trying to encroach on its territory.
I mean, equity, right?
That equity and equity denies that wholeheartedly, and they're going back and forth on who walked out of negotiations, and
right.
They're each saying the other side walked out.
Right. I mean, and equity, I think, feels that SAG encroached on their territory.
Yes. The question is, of course, as soon as starting from March, when the theaters started Zooming their performances, and technically that's broadcast, which is you would think would be under and appears to be contractually under SAG's purview. And then there was proposals for a waiver to allow equity to keep some of that, and that has at this point fallen apart. So let's.
Yeah, it's very ugly, and a lot of actors are members of both unions, as you know.
Right.
So they feel like literally mom and dad are fighting. And we had a piece which I encourage people to look at American Theater Magazine, where we did a deep dive into this, where we looked at independent Shakespeare company out there in LA, which uses equity contracts for all of its plays. Did Romeo and Juliet as a sort of a film, it had theater elements, but was had a lot of film elements, edited, shot. Even so, they went to equity first because that's their equity signatory, and they actually were working with equity. Things were going okay, but then I think equity's the bar for whether they'll allow people to work at all is like caseloads have to be a certain level. And so I spoke to their artistic director, David Melville.
When you say caseloads have to be a certain level, could you explain that?
No, just like the percentage of cases in the area where the theater is.
Okay.
Of COVID cases has to be at a certain level.
COVID cases. Okay.
Yeah, and it was a pretty low bar, and David looked at the calendar and thought that's we're not going to reach that level until next year probably. And this is in Los Angeles, so SAG didn't have that same thing. In part, I think it's very technical, but I think in part because what they were doing was more like a shoot than there wasn't going to be an audience coming. There wasn't going to be a lot of the things that equity you would rightly be concerned about, having people come in and out. It would just be like a film set. So in any case, the SAG contract worked better for him. Conversely, we spoke to Syracuse Stage in New York, and they're shooting Tally's Folly, I believe it is, with a husband and wife couple. A lot of these husband and wife couples coming up because they're already quarantined and bubbled and they can act together. I think North Coast Rep is doing same time next year, same idea. It's like, so you expect a lot of the two-handers, love letters, they're shooting the play on their stage without an audience. And that's going to be, they went with equity. And I guess they've got a waiver for that because so there's this vestigial relationship equity that has with these theaters, the larger theaters and commercial theaters. Then conversely, again, another example is Diana, that's going to be on Netflix, the Broadway show.
Yes.
Not like we really need that, but in any case, a musical about Diana's life. That's going to be on Netflix, and that's going to be SAG. And like these areas are, before COVID, there was a pretty clear delineation. Unions worked pretty well together. So if you were Passover at Steppenwolf Steppenwolf Theater, that play, you had a successful run, and Spike Lee comes around and says he wants to make a movie of it for HBO or whatever it was, or Amazon. Then you get a little extra money from equity, like through equity, your equity contract to get recorded, like they have a deal for that. And then it's all the day rate is all SAG-AFTRA,
Mhm.
right? That's a because it's for film, it's for TV. The problem is that now things are being made directly for that. There's like no audience involved.
Yes, yeah.
And so that jurisdictional dispute is like it's a live one. And I don't know, I think
England may hold the answer.
it might. Well, I think a lot of folks are saying that why don't we have one union? Now, when I was at Backstage, Backstage West, we covered how difficult it was even just for SAG and AFTRA to merge. So bringing unions together can be difficult. The other sticking point, which I'm sure this is a technical point, but it's a big one, is that Actors Equity covers stage managers.
Right.
Which is, it's a weird quirk of Actors Equity, but they do cover them. And they're not covered by SAG-AFTRA. So they would have to work out that situation.
Yes.
So,
yes.
And so, I mean, stage managers are definitely opposed to the single union thing. I've also heard from some folks, and I didn't realize, I don't know my labor history that well, that the unions although in England they do have one union for everything.
Yes.
For you do voiceover, you do a commercial, you do a play, you do a film, it's all the same union. That the unions aren't that strong there since Thatcher. That unions are fairly weak. They don't even, West End is apparently not even entirely union. So I don't know if that's related to the fact that they're all one union. I think that might be two separate facts. I think the one union thing, in any case, that would be a solution, but that's a little bit like, at this point, in the midst of this crisis, a little bit like saying, it'd be great if we all had universal healthcare so the unions weren't the way, and our jobs weren't the way we got healthcare. It's a solution that we have to work toward. It's not happening soon.
Yep.
So in the meantime, SAG has filed a resolution to basically get a mediator, get them to the table, because I think they want actors to work.
So that was through the 4As.
The 4As, exactly. I mean, equity is in a vulnerable position. I mean, because as theater often is, I don't think it's as big a union. It's not as, and since the Broadway shows have closed, they have nothing coming in to their members or to their health plans. So it is a huge crisis for their workers and for the union. So I'm not sure. I mean, their fortunes are downstream from the fortunes of the theater, as are we who cover it. We're part of this economy that's on the ropes right now. It's on the ropes right now. Now, we've had no shortage of things to write about and worry about and talk about. I mean, I think I could mention that American Theater Magazine is no longer in print right now. We're talking about bringing it back into print at some point, but right now it's online only, just finances, But I don't know. I do think there is a larger issue, which I can allude to. I know this is a big deal in Los Angeles, just about the unions, the extent to which it represents all kinds of theater everywhere.
Right.
And I think most actors want to be represented by a union. They want to be paid well. They also want, as I went through the equity wars, a version of them myself. They want to be able to get up on a stage and do their work too, and they want to be able to find ways to do that. And sometimes they are the union can stand in their way, as you know.
Yeah.
And right now, there's not really much work to be had. So it's a sort of a vicious spiral, in terms of, I do hope they can work it out between the two unions. Because it's going to affect work on stage, not just on these digital things. It's going to affect work being done. The return to the stage in terms of, is it going to wait for a vaccine? Is it going to wait for audience confidence? That's going to be a very delicate and fraught moment for the theater, and the union is going to have to be ready for that. And I'm not saying they have to make concessions that will ignore people's health, but it's going to be a whole thing. I do think they'll feel pressure from producers who also are feeling pressure to pass on the stress to them and give them a break, basically. I mean, I've heard producers say that we're going to need a break from the unions, when it's like everyone needs a break right now. But in any case, it's it's an interesting time. May you live in interesting times, and we certainly are, right?
Rob Kent, thank you so much for joining us.
Stephen, it's such a pleasure. I wish there were happier things we're talking about, but
there will be.
There will be, and it's
that time.
As long as we're gathered in this way, right?
Right.
There's some kind of theater happening. All right.
Better, and people are still talking, and that's they're shouting a lot, but they're also talking.
They're also talking. Hopefully. Wonderful to see you.
Likewise. Now, next week, we'll be turning to a project that's been in development since long before the pandemic. It's called TeenTix LA. It's an online hub that, working with arts organizations, helps makes the arts affordable and accessible to teenagers. Based on TeenTix Seattle, and in partnership with them, as well as with support from the Amundsen Foundation and from NSI, the program is now well into the planning stages here in Los Angeles. We'll be speaking with Dr. Susanna Smith-Bautista and Chandra Jackson, respectively the lead consultant and the advisory board president. That's next week.